Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye. Dear devotees, we're continuing our reading of the Srimad Bhāgavatam. And we're taking up where we left off last, which is in the third canto. And the chapter is number 26, entitled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. And we'll start up at text number 17, is it? How about that? Okay. My dear mother, O daughter of... I'm sorry? Is there a dispute? Okay. My dear mother, O daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, the time factor, as I have explained, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom the creation begins as a result of the agitation of the neutral, unmanifested nature. Purport: the unmanifested state of material nature, pradhana, is being explained. The Lord says that when the unmanifested material nature is agitated by the glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it begins to manifest itself in different ways. Before this agitation, it remains in the neutral state, without interaction by the three modes of material nature. In other words, material nature cannot produce any variety or manifestations without the contact. In other words, material nature cannot produce any variety of manifestations without the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is very nicely explained in Bhagavad Gita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of the products of material nature. Without his contact, material nature cannot produce anything. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita also, a very, very suitable example is given in this connection. Although the nipples on a goat's neck appear to be breast nipples, they do not give milk. Similarly, material nature appears to the material scientist to act and react in a wonderful manner, but in reality, it cannot act without the agitator, time, who is the representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When time agitates the neutral state of material nature begins to produce varieties of manifestations. Ultimately, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of creation. As a woman cannot produce children unless impregnated by a man, material nature cannot produce or manifest anything unless it is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of the time factor. By exhibiting his potencies, the Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all these different elements, keeping himself within as the Supersoul and without as time. Purport: here it is stated that within the heart, the Supreme Personality of Godhead resides as the Supersoul. This situation is also explained in Bhagavad Gita. The Supersoul rests beside the individual soul and acts as a witness. This is also confirmed elsewhere in the Vedic literature. Two birds are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing and the other is eating the fruits of the tree. This Purusha or Paramatma who resides within the body of the individual soul is described in Bhagavad Gita 13:23 as upadrashta, witness, and the anumanta, sanctioning authority. The conditioned soul engages in the happiness and distress of the particular body given him by the arrangement of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Living Being, or the Paramatma, is different from the conditioned soul. He is described in Bhagavad Gita as Maheshwar, or the Supreme Lord. He is Paramatma, not Jivatma. Paramatma means the Super Soul, who is sitting by the side of the conditioned soul just to sanction his activities. The conditioned soul comes to this material world in order to lord it over material nature. Since one cannot do anything without the sanction of the Supreme Lord, he lives with the Jiva soul as witness and sanction giver. He is also Bhokta. He gives maintenance and sustenance to the conditioned soul. Since the living entity is constitutionally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is very affectionate to the living entities. Unfortunately, when the living entity is bewildered or illusioned by the external energy, he becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord. But as soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. The minute independence of the conditioned soul is exhibited by his marginal position. If he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living entity is given that independence. His conditional life is ended. His conditional life is ended and his life becomes successful as soon as he turns his face to the Lord. But by misusing his independence, he enters into material existence. Yet the Lord is so kind that, as Super Soul, he always remains with the conditioned soul. The concern of the Lord is neither to enjoy nor to suffer from the material body. He remains with the Jiva simply as sanction giver and witness so that the living entity can receive the results of his activities, good or bad. Outside the body of the conditioned soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as the time factor. According to the Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 25 elements. The 24 elements already described, plus the time factor, make 25. According to some learned philosophers, the Super Soul is included to make a total of 26 elements. After the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature with his internal potency, material nature delivers the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranmaya. This takes place in material nature when she is agitated by the destinations of the conditioned souls. Purport: this impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse 3. Material nature's primal factor is the Mahat Tattva, or breeding source of all varieties. This part of material nature, which is called Pradhana, as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and delivers varieties of living entities. Material nature in this connection is called Brahman because it is a perverted reflection of the spiritual nature. It is described in the Vishnu Purana that the living entities belong to the spiritual nature. The potency of the Supreme Lord is spiritual, and the living entities, although they are called marginal potency, are also spiritual. If the living entities were not spiritual, this description of impregnation by the Supreme Lord would not be applicable. The Supreme Lord does not put his semen into that which is not spiritual. But it is stated here that the Supreme Person puts his semen into material nature. This means that the living entities are spiritual by nature. After impregnation, material nature delivers all kinds of living entities, beginning from the greatest living creature, Lord Brahma, down to the insignificant ant in all varieties of form. In Bhagavad Gita 14.4, material nature is clearly mentioned as Sarva Yonishu. This means that all varieties of species, demigods, human beings, animals, birds and beasts, whatever is manifested, Material nature is the mother, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the seed-giving father. Generally, it is experienced that the father gives life to the child, but the mother gives its body. Although the seed of life is given by the father, the body develops within the womb of the mother. Similarly, the spiritual living entities are impregnated into the womb of material nature, but the body, being supplied by material nature, takes on many different species and forms of life. The theory that the symptoms of life are manifest by the interaction of the 24 material elements is not supported here. The living force comes directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is completely spiritual. Therefore, no material scientific advancement can produce life. The living force comes from the spiritual world and has nothing to do with the interaction of the material elements. Thus, after manifesting variegatedness, the effulgent Mahatattva, which contains all the universes within itself, which is the root of all cosmic manifestations, and which is not destroyed at the time of annihilation, swallows the darkness that covered the effulgence at the time of dissolution. Purport: since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is ever existing, all blissful and full of knowledge, his different energies are also ever existing in the dormant stage. Thus, when the Mahatattva was created, it manifested the material ego and swallowed up the darkness which covered the cosmic manifestation at the time of dissolution. This idea can be further explained. A person at night remains inactive, covered by the darkness of night. But when he is awakened in the morning, the covering of night, or the forgetfulness of the sleeping state, disappears. Similarly, when the Mahatattva appears after the night of dissolution, the effulgence is manifested to exhibit the variegatedness of this material world. Text 21. The mode of goodness, which is the clear, sober status of understanding the personality of Godhead, and which is generally called Vasudeva, or consciousness, becomes manifest in the Mahatattva. Purport: the Vasudeva manifestation, or the status of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called pure goodness, or Shuddha Sattva. In the Shuddha Sattva status, there is no infringement of the other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. In the Vedic literature, there is mention of the Lord's expansion as the four personalities of Godhead: Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Here, in the reappearance of the Mahatattva, the four expansions of Godhead occur. He who is seated within as Supersoul expands first as Vasudeva. The Vasudeva stage is free from infringement by material desires, and it is the status in which one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the objective which is described in the Bhagavad Gita as Adbhuta. This is another feature of the Mahatattva. The Vasudeva expansion is also called Krishna consciousness, for it is free from all tinges of material passion and ignorance. This clear state of understanding helps one to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vasudeva status is also explained in Bhagavad Gita as yadṛcchayā, which refers to the knower of the field of activities as well as the super-knower. The living being who has occupied a particular type of body knows that body. The living being who has occupied a particular type of body knows that body, but the super-knower, Vasudeva, knows not only a particular type of body, but also the field of activities in all the different varieties of bodies. In order to be situated in clear consciousness or Krishna consciousness, one must worship Vasudeva. Vasudeva is Krishna alone. When Krishna or Vishnu is alone, without the accompaniment of his internal energy, he is Vasudeva. When he is accompanied by his internal potency, he is called Dwarkadish. To have clear consciousness or Krishna consciousness, one has to worship Vasudeva. It is also explained in Bhagavad Gita that after many, many births, one surrenders to Vasudeva. such a great soul is very rare. In order to get release from the false ego, one has to worship Sankarshan. Sankarshan is also worshipped through Lord Shiva. The snakes which cover the body of Lord Shiva are representations of Sankarshan. And Lord Shiva is always absorbed in meditation upon Sankarshan. One who is actually a worshipper of Lord Shiva as a devotee of Sankarshan can be released from false material ego. If one wants to get free from material disturbances, one has to worship Aniruddha. For this purpose, worship of the moon planet is also recommended in the Vedic literature. Similarly, to be fixed in one's intelligence, one has to worship Pradyumna, which is reached through the worship of Brahma. These matters are explained in Vedic literature. After the manifestation of the Mahatattva, these features appear simultaneously. As water in its natural state, before coming into contact with earth, is clear, sweet, and unruffled, so the characteristic traits of pure consciousness are complete serenity, clarity, and freedom from distraction. Purport. The pure status of consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, exists in the beginning. Just after creation, consciousness is not polluted. The more one becomes materially contaminated, however, the more consciousness becomes obscured. In pure consciousness, one can perceive a slight reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As in clear, unagitated water, free from impurities, one can see everything clearly. So in pure consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one can see things as they are. One can see the reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one can see his own existence as well. This state of consciousness is very pleasing, transparent, and sober. In the beginning, consciousness is pure. The material ego springs up from the Mahatattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Purport. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there's always the chance that this will happen, and therefore one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities, which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure consciousness, as soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. You wanted Sankhya? You're getting Sankhya. Text 25. The threefold ahankar, the source of the gross elements, the senses and the mind, is identical with them because it is their cause. It is known by the name of Sankarsana, who is directly Lord Ananta with 1,000 heads. This false ego is characterized as the doer, as an instrument, and as an effect. It is further characterized as serene, active, or dull, according to how it is influenced by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Purport. Ahankar, or false ego, is transformed into the demigods, the controlling directors of material affairs. As an instrument, the false ego is represented as different senses and sense organs. And as the result of the combination of the demigods and the senses, material objects are produced. In the material world, we are producing so many things, and this is called advancement of civilization. But actually, the advancement of civilization is a manifestation of the false ego. By false ego, all material things are produced as objects of enjoyment. One has to cease increasing artificial necessities in the form of material objects. One great Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, has lamented that when one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudeva or Krishna consciousness, he becomes entangled in material activities. The exact words he uses are Satsanga Chadi Kainu Asate Vidlas Te Karane Lagila Je Karma Bandha Vahansa. I've given up the pure status of consciousness because I wanted to enjoy in the temporary material manifestation. Therefore I have been entangled in the network of actions and reactions. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. Purport. The symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, as long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering. And all this rejection and acceptance is asat, temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection. However advanced a man is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject, and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter. We'll take a few reflections or questions. Yes, Narada Muni.
Okay, so I've had this question for a very long time. We were reading this canto. We just finished the third canto in New York for our daily Bhāgavatam class, and we tried to figure this out, but I didn't get a satisfactory answer. And so my question is, see, this verse is text 14. I think it was from we were reading it earlier today, but it was right when we finished. The verse says, the internal subtle senses are experienced as having four aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. So my question is saying, Mamo buddhir ahankaras chitam ityantad atmakam chaturdha lakshate bhedho vritya lakshana rupaya. So ahankara is defined as ego, and then chittam is consciousness. So I'm trying to
say that again.
So ahankara here is defined as ego, and then chittam is consciousness. So he's saying there's four aspects of the internal subtle senses.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is in the shape of the mind, one of them is intelligence, one is ego, and one is contaminated consciousness.
Uh-huh.
And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on
Why
that.
it says Chittam and Ahankara, and
Yeah.
it's got 4?
Yeah.
Because the Chitta, as is explained by Patanjali Muni, is it's a conglomerate. It's not one thing. But according to the Patanjali, it's the mind, the intelligence, and the false ego together. So in any case, it's at least 2. And in Sankhya may differ from in the way things are categorized, as Prabhupada and Kṛṣṇa himself points out in the 11th canto. He says, some people count it like this, some people count it like that. So that's the distinction of Chitta. It's called one thing, but it's actually the group of those instruments.
Okay. And so that's why it's considered 4, because
Yes.
the Chittam here is considered the conglomeration of those 3
That's
things.
why.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Verse number 24, Guru Maharaj, the last paragraph, the second paragraph. I would like to hear more from you about inattentiveness, carelessness, which can lead to fall down due to false ego.
Well, there's a way in which Rupa Goswami describes the phenomena of niyamagraha. And he says, so there's 2 parts to it. Niyamagraha means you embrace something without knowing what you're doing, by cultural momentum, or you just really haven't looked into it that deeply. You accept it generally, but you don't really know why you're doing it exactly, but you do it for the sake of doing it. And the other part is niyamagraha, which means you stop doing it altogether. And oftentimes that is a result of niyamagraha, because you're not getting any taste. Therefore it seems like imaginary. I mean, I know people have left Krishna consciousness and they say, well, no more talking snakes for me. So they forget the purpose of it altogether, and they drift away. So, Siddhanta bola chitta nakara alash iha hoite Krishna lagi sudrid manash. To have a fixed mind, one must have a siddhanta. And therefore, tachcharadhana munayo jnana vairagya yuktaya pashyantya atmani chatmanam bhakta shruta grahitaya. Sutta Goswami says early on in the Bhāgavatam, you should be fortified. You have to study the scriptures, and Prabhupada specifically mentions you should know the books of the Goswamis. Sahajya say, all this philosophy, not necessary. But Sutta says to the sages, no, you have to be clear. Because Siddhanta Bulya Chitta Nakaralash, Siddhanta means to have precision understanding of why you're doing something. For instance, you could be singing prayers to the Guru Vandanam. And Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasadam Room. You could be singing anything and not really have an idea of what it means. Or you could be saying Tulsi prayers and not know that it's a request, that please engage me in this kind of bhakti where I'm following in your footsteps, and you can make an arrangement for me in the spiritual world. That's a different experience than just dancing around the tree, which is fine, but you should also come to know what it is. Well, we say the hill, the tree. And so there's that kind of neglect and not finding out what's really going on that can lead to that kind of sloppiness, which is counteracted by not being lazy and taking time to fortify oneself to know clearly. Then he said, Sudrid Manash, then the mind becomes very fixed and firm. And there's myriad other ways in which one can become lazy, primarily because of association. If we take the association of those who criticize Vaishnavas, then it's an offense. And Prabhupada mentions, or Rupa Goswami mentions, Prabhupada summarizes in the Nectar of Devotion, that one can lose one's status by offending devotees. You can slip down, and it depends on how serious the offense is. You can drop down a notch, you can drop down 2-3 notches, you can be knocked out completely. And then there's association with those who are attached to material relationships. And that becomes a way in which we then redevelop all kinds of attachments to the material world. And as it says, the relationship between men and women is the most binding force in the world. Pumsa striya maituni bhavamitam toyomitu hridaya grantamahu, forms a knot. And then our acharyas say that, a man gets attached to a woman, but more pernicious is if a man gets attached to another man who is attached to a woman. Or vice versa, the man-woman thing is so-called man, so-called woman, was what we're talking about. The forms of the material nature, which are false representations, which start off with what we talked about this morning, the reality getting perverted into the material world, and then we take false forms, and then we get attached in different ways. And so there are myriad ways that one can become distracted from devotional service or move away from the strict path. But association is one of them, and that's why keeping sadhusanga is the most important, and avoiding offenses, and then being careful to avoid niyamagraha. Who else had their hand up? Mahendra Prabhu. 1, 2, 3, 4, looking outside. All clear for now. Go ahead.
My question was related somehow, and I also noted Prabhupada in a few places, making us aware of the importance to be careful, not neglectful, and the example from the Upanishads to be, we were on the razor's edge, and a little inattention, and then you cut yourself. And I thought good example also is Bharat Maharaj in terms of also inattention and neglect of what you're doing, even if he knew what he was doing, but just gradually he lost it. But here, this chapter, Prabhupada says that as long as one has even a slight desire to enjoy or lord it over material nature, there is no chance of his being freed from the influence of nature's material modes. Therefore, one has to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead analytically. As explained in the Sankhya system, you partially answered by saying this: we have to fortify the mind by understanding the Siddhanta. But I just couldn't make the connection how by understanding analytically you get free from desire.
Well, here's one way. When we understand what our relationship is with Krishna, the part to the whole, we appreciate more and more how when I give to the whole, the part is automatically nourished. When we switch to that understanding, we are on the safe side because we've analyzed how am I actually getting fed? How am I being nourished? I mean, Krishna deals with this in the Bhagavad Gita. Jagnartat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadar tam karma kontaya muktasanga samachara. There's a way in which he's describing in that section of the third chapter about how when we give to yajna, then everything good happens for us. That's analytical understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada gives simple analogies. For instance, he talks about how the senses once went on strike because they thought, we're working so hard to feed the stomach, all it does is just accept. And then they stopped working. And they said, we're not feeding you anymore because you just sit there. And we're doing all the work. And then they found out because they made the connection that we stopped feeding and now we became weak and we can't act, so we understand our symbiotic relationship. And Prahlad Maharaj expresses it, I quoted earlier at least twice, Naivatmano Prabhuranayam Nijalabha Purno Manam Janada Fisad Karuno Vrinite Yad Yashano Bhagavate Badidita Kamam Tachchatmane Manam Tachchatmane Pratimukasya Yatamukashri. That he says, it's just like this. A person decorating his or her face in the mirror notices that the reflection is decorated. Aha. So Prahlad says, we're the reflections of Krishna. So if you decorate Krishna, or as a metaphor for giving your attention, giving whatever you have to Krishna, then you're actually giving to yourself because you're part of Krishna. So that's an analytical understanding that inspires someone to say, all for Krishna, and well, none for me. When one understands, the more I give, the more I grow. The more I give in Krishna, and someone then, as Shukadeva says this at the end of the 14th chapter of the 10th canto, Atmanam Akilatmanam. I think the word came up earlier in the canto here too. But he says, when we understand, well, first of all, he says, the reason the body is valuable is because we're in it. And imagine how attached we are to the body because we're in it. And then imagine how valuable the soul is. But then imagine the soul of your soul. How valuable is the soul of your soul if we're that attached to the body because the soul's in it? And so then he says Krishna is that soul of our soul. And that's an analytical understanding of our relationship with Krishna. And if we understand that, then we give, and we can transfer, as Prabhupada uses that verb so many times, we can transfer whatever we're giving to Krishna. Just sign it over.
So the perspective of the desire changes.
Yeah.
That's what the knowledge gives, and then it's all problem solved.
Yeah. Who's next? Yadutama.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I was listening in to the morning reading, and please bear with me. I'm trying to formulate this question, but there was a statement in one of the it's about we get a spiritual body or a material body according to our desires, more or less. And I was thinking about that in context of this Vasudeva consciousness, Krishna consciousness. And my question is, we're Tatashta Shakti, we're in that marginal potency, and we can, in other words, we're choosing the material body or we're choosing the spiritual body. And is this Vasudeva consciousness, is it something that we tap into? It's not something that we have to more or less purify because it's already completely pure. So is it something that gradually comes, or is it something that is there always? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, it's there always. Vasudeva is Krishna. It's Krishna consciousness, so that's always there. But because we're a part of Krishna, even though we're part of Krishna, or because we're part of Krishna, and we're tiny, then we can become covered. And when we become uncovered, then as the Bhāgavatam describes, it's like agam dunvanti Kṛṣṇa nihara iva bhaskara. It's like when the sun dissipates fog and then it becomes clear. Before that, Prabhupada describes in that purport, from the verse I just quoted, he said it, foggy and it's difficult for a pedestrian to see where they're going. But when the sun comes and clears up the fog, then you see the sun has always been there. It's just fog was temporarily covering. Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam Yadiyate Tatra Puman Apavrita. There's a way in which Shiva says, as soon as you come to the state of Shuddha Sattva, then you automatically see Krishna. That's the state in which you can see Krishna. It was indicated here also. When the consciousness is pure, you can see a reflection of Krishna in your own consciousness. So the purification process, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. And also mentioned, this Shuddha Sattva is mentioned, Nashta Prayushu Bhadrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhakti Naishtiki, Tada Rajas Tamo Bhava, Kama Lovarayasche, Cheta Eterna Vidams, Stitam Sattve Prasidati. That Stitam Sattve is a gradual progression as one's hearing the Bhagavatam. It's described, one comes to Stitam Sattve, and that Sattve means Shuddha Sattva. So when one's consciousness, tada rajas, at that time, the lower modes of nature are cleared away, and one comes to Shuddha Sattva. And at that time, evam prasanna manaso bhagavat bhakti yogata bhagavat tattva vijnana mukta sangha sajayate. It's a very clear understanding and realization of the Lord. All right? Okay. Who was next? I went 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can't remember which direction I went. Were you? You were 3?
I was 4.
You're 4? Who's 3? You're 3? Did you have your hand up earlier? No. Oh, boy. Busted. Okay, go ahead.
So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur wants to chime in on Narada Muni's Prabhu's question that the 4 aspects of the internal sense organ, antarkarna, mind, intelligence, ego, and chitta. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary to 3.26.14 says, in this analysis, Mahatattva has not been mentioned separately, but can be considered equivalent to chitta. So he identifies chitta, consciousness, with Mahatattva, and that's described later in verse 21, that Mahatattva, which is represented by chitta in the body, predominated by sattva, is pure, peaceful, and the place to worship the Lord, also called Vasudeva. So that's a little bit of substance.
It's interesting also that Mahatattva, our bodies are made of that. That's the. No, you didn't have your hand? Okay.
Is this like a place?
Oh, you were just helping out, and now you're asking a question.
Well, I didn't have a question.
I mean a comment. What, do you got a follow-up or something? We need Robert's rules here. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry for hijacking. So is that in other words saying that the Mahatattva is a place for worship, in other words, and that we have to use it in the correct way as well?
That's true. Brahmarpanam brahmahavir brahmagnau brahmanohutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahmakarma samadhina. When you utilize you call it Mahatattva, in Krishna's service, then it becomes transformed from matter to spirit. So I concur with your statement.
Just wanted to add that the Naivatmana Prabhuryam, the mirror analogy, is 7.9.11, and the verse with Admanam Akhilatmanam is 10.14.55, where Shukadeva Goswami says, you should know Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. For the benefit of the whole universe, he has, out of his own causeless mercy, appeared as an ordinary human being. He's done this by the strength of his internal potency. 10.14.55.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I feel like this description shows yet another way that Krishna is just so beautiful and wonderful and merciful, because although he's describing the material cosmic manifestation and how it comes into being, and this is basically the prison for the rebellious conditioned souls, But he gives us the best possible chance by starting off the whole thing with completely pure Vishuddha Sattva, and he describes it as Hiranmaya Mahatattva. That Hiranmaya means golden, effulgent, right? Like Hiranmaya Patrena, it's like this dazzling, golden, effulgent thing, and that it's completely pure, and that it's practically non-different from himself, and that all the different planets and universes and everything is compact within the Mahatattva. And there's another part in Bhāgavatam where the same word Hiranmaya is used to describe the universal form. So it's kind of like interesting how the universal form is everything, and the Mahatattva is also everything, but in a compact, like almost unmanifested yet form. It's sort of like is Hiranmaya in this condensed form, and then it expands into the universal form, and both of them are non-different from Kṛṣṇa, being his energies. And then we are injected into that beautiful, dazzling light infused with Vishuddha Sattva, and then it's our consciousness that contaminates it.
Messes the whole thing up.
We mess everything up with our desire to be independent of Kṛṣṇa. It's just like everything. He gives us a relatively beautiful planet, and then we come and pollute it, and it's just foul consciousness.
Yeah.
But I was thinking also that there's one class that Prabhupada gives just about Sankhya Yoga, and the title, the devotees give titles to the Prabhupada's classes. So the title is Understanding the Trap. And then the idea is that if we can understand how we've become entrapped in the situation of material bondage, then we can understand how to pick the lock, and get out, how we can get out of this trap. So what we're seeing here is that what transformed pure goodness into what we are at, where we are at now, is this desire to be independent, the false ego identification with the body as the self. So if we can just overcome that, if we can just understand, the spiritual reality that we're souls, that we're eternal servants of Kṛṣṇa, and declare our dependence on Kṛṣṇa, then it all becomes beautiful again. And then it's like, when we get the merciful glance of that Karuna Kataksha of Lord Chaitanya, then Vishvam Purvam Sukhayate, everything becomes, the whole universe becomes happy and beautiful and wonderful, because we see it as Vishuddha Sattva, we see it as Krishna's pure energy, everything connected to Kṛṣṇa. So it's just a way of like, okay, we got ourselves into this mess so far away from Vishuddha Sattva that we started in, but it's not difficult to get back. By the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, by the process of bhakti, we can gradually extricate ourselves from the trap and get back to pure consciousness.
I call it an undo button. Yeah. In fact, I gave a class about, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I gave it to corporates, but it was having to do with non-application of the conglomerating principle.
Say that again?
Called non-application of the conglomerating principle. That's there in Brahma Samhita. By non-application of the conglomerating principle, well, yeah, it's describing the way the universe, we're getting this understanding, the context through Sankhya, how everything develops from subtle to gross. And as you were pointing out so aptly, there is a way to undo that, which is being presented to us throughout the Bhāgavatam. And so it was an enticement to them. Did you ever want to undo what you've done? I saw an advertisement once where it's like somebody made a mistake, and it's like, just hit the undo button. They hit it, and it's like, it's all back. It all comes back to the way it was. Actually, we have that on the computer, Command X, on the Control Z on the Mac. Yeah, it's the do-over. Yeah, do-over. Okay, we have one from Vrindavana Vilasani. Okay, fantastic. They're listening in from Hyderabad.
Hare Krishna, dear Guru Maharaj, please accept our obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the assembled devotees. We just remembered the verse from the beginning of Govardhana pastimes. in relation to Siddhanta Bolite Chitta. Srimad Bhāgavatam 10:24-6. When people in this world perform activities, sometimes they understand what they are doing and sometimes they don't. Those who know what they are doing achieve success in their work, whereas ignorant people do not.
What a great citation. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, for the close, because we had to take our break.
I was reflecting on the topic of Vasudeva and how he's ever present, and also Srila Prabhupada writes, I can't remember the purport, he describes that the super soul is incessantly, he's always trying to reach us, yet we're not reciprocating. And
that's in the 8th canto, in the section of Gajendra.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
and
go ahead.
I was, yeah, it just seems, even with experiences and hearing so much, and we know Krishna is the Bhāgavatam, Krishna is he is the Bhagavad Gita as well, and I know what we're reading, but we don't hear him in the quality of Krishna being fully present before us. So I was just wondering why we don't hear with that quality.
Well, it has to do with our level of interest, which increases as we discussed before of what Krishna means to us and who he actually is. When we're unsure of our relationship and it seems theoretical, then it's easy to have a philosophized Krishna, sort of a cartoon idea, and then we may not be that interested. We may try to be interested, but the mind doesn't become naturally attracted. But there, as the Bhagavatam, the progression of verses in this paragraph written in Sanskrit, starting with Shushusho Shadatanasya all the way up to Bidite Hridaya Grantish, there's a way in which we progressively become more and more interested. It's because of the path to lesser goals we've opened for ourselves, and we have a sense of our interest is in taking care of the body, or not taking care of the body, but first of all this idea that I have to survive because I am my body and so forth. But when we have a clear idea and we're realizing that Krishna is right there with us, when we actually see for ourselves that Krishna is reciprocating with us at every step, and that he's fully present with us, and our interest, we shift from being interested in the reflection, and then we turn towards reality. And fortunately, reality is fulfilling, whereas the other isn't. So it's just a matter of, as Prabhupada has pointed out here, transferring our attention in that way. When there's anarthas, anartha, it means we have false values. We think something else is more important. Then, to finish my sentence, then we don't have the wherewithal to be attracted to Krishna because we're distracted by other things. So let's take our break. We can come back if you wish at 25 minutes after. See you then. Hare Krishna.